No, we are live.
Woo,
Welcome, Diane. How are you
woo.
doing?
I'm great. How are you? It's finally
Yeah.
sunny in Paris, so it's making me all sorts of happy.
Oh, look, we have rain. We had sun yesterday, so I sent it over and said, okay, I need you to have a good mood tomorrow or today for the conversation.
It
Uh,
will probably be the only time that Germany sent over good weather to France, so thank you very
Come
much.
on, come on. Uh, okay, perfect. We just wait a little bit until more
Yeah,
people join the conversation. Maybe let me just tell the audience like how we
the
actually
context. Yes,
how
it's a
we
great story,
connected,
actually.
because we had another LinkedIn Live, right? And then afterwards, somebody approached me from Paris, Shannon. She said,
Yeah.
like, "Hey, Thomas, did you notice? Uh, it's not equal weighted, like having men and women here in this show, right?" And I said, well, sometimes it's hard to find great female product people to speak. And do you know somebody? And she connected me to you. And here we go. We are here, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks, Shannon, for
yeah,
connecting us
yeah,
and
yeah.
for pointing it out as well.
I think you two guys run the Woman in Product Paris, right?
Yeah, so basically, when I moved back to France, when was that? 6, 7 years ago.
Mm.
I was fresh off working for a Norwegian company
Mm.
where I was working on building an internal women network, so mentee mentor type of
Mhm.
network.
Mhm.
And then I came to Paris and I thought, oh shit, there's no like women in product space here. It's really too bad. Oh, France is so behind, blah blah blah, complaining. And
Mm.
then I realized if everyone thinks like that, nothing's ever going to happen. And so I started a meetup page for Women in Product Paris, kind of shamelessly took the name and
Mhm.
applied it to Paris.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I've been doing that for 6 years. And actually, we're going to announce it tomorrow. But now the Women in Product Paris is becoming the first official European chapter for the WIP org. So we're very excited. And yeah, thank you. Shannon is part of the team,
Yeah.
and she's wonderful. And you should definitely have her as a speaker as well. She's got plenty to say.
Yeah, nice. Wonderful. So I really wonder whether I don't know if Shannon, maybe she's listening too, right? I see already some people tuning in. Feel free to just, write in the comments where you're from, say hello. You can
Yeah,
always comment on the conversation. We are able to show here in the live stream if you have questions. Eda from Hamburg, hello. We have
hi.
Sebastian saying hello, and some other people. So yeah, just type in where you're from, what are you doing. That gives us a little bit context in the conversation here. If we know who's joining, and Shannon, if you're here, you know.
Please say hi.
Hello, yeah. Um, why don't we start that you just tell the audience a little bit like what's your background, like what did you do in product, and yeah, share a little bit of your life, what you
Yeah,
did.
for sure. So, hi everyone, I'm Diane. I am French, currently based in Paris, and today I work as a product lead freelancer. So, basically, working for myself. I'm extremely lucky in the sense that I found a job that I love, which is product management, pretty early on after graduating from business school. Although prior to going to business school, I actually hold a bachelor in political philosophy, which means that you can really become a product manager with any type of degree. Just to demystify this,
Yeah.
I worked for 2 years, mostly in the film industry, and that basically I thought maybe if I want to be taken seriously in the business world, I need a business degree. I'm not sure if this is a very correct assumption, but anyway, that's the way that I thought. Um, back then, and so I wanted to work at the intersection of content, and what I call the internet. And then I realized the internet was more interesting to me than content, and that's how I became a product manager. I was very lucky. So my first job was for a French TV channel, and back then, basically, you worked in marketing if you were going to create the product, but if you didn't hold an engineering degree, people thought you weren't able to work with developers. So I kind of had half of the PM job, but not the other half. And I felt very frustrated with the fact that I didn't have the opportunity to kind of like follow through. Now you have your ideas, but then you cannot pass them on to someone who has an engineering degree and then bye-bye. And I found that really frustrating. That's when I started working for a fantastic Norwegian company called Schibsted, who basically trusted me to ask the right question, and that's how I became a product manager. And so since then, it's been roughly 10 years. So I went to work for different type of companies, so French and non-French, international, scale-up, startups, corporate jobs as well. I went through the very typical PM, senior PM, lead PM type of trajectory. And then at some point, I had a job which was super interesting, and we mentioned it when we were discussing this conversation. But things kind of went sideways for a number of reasons, and I took a break for 6 months where I really kind of reevaluated what I wanted my career to look like and what I wanted my life, generally speaking, to look like. And that's when I became a freelancer. Interestingly, I never thought that product managers could become freelancers, but you know what? You can, and it's great. So we can talk about that later. But basically, this is how I started thinking. In French, we call it déformation professionnelle. It's when basically the way you think at work kind of transpires in your everyday life. And I started thinking in terms of like outcome and outputs in my own life choices in my own career. And that's how the conversation that we're having kind of came about, how product management frameworks and tools are super useful in your everyday life. And by the way, I really don't think you should apply the methodology very precisely to your everyday job. I think you definitely need a bit of flexibility, but they're also super useful tools to think about your life and career. And that's why we're talking about this today.
Exactly. Super interesting. Political philosophy.
Yes, I was hell-bent on never finding a job.
That's typically, you're entitled to become a taxi driver, right?
Yeah, you could also, that's true.
But it's super interesting, actually, like first thought here, like when you think about product today, you actually don't need to know how to code or all this fancy stuff. It's so much about communication.
Yeah.
Right. So
communication and asking the right questions, definitely.
So it's ridiculous what you said, like back then, that, like people thought if you don't have, this or that degree, you're not entitled to do product management, right?
Yeah. And it creates also that type of requirements, which ultimately focuses more on what you've done as opposed to what you know how to do in terms of skills. Ends up having a lot of endogamy. So you have product managers that have very similar profiles, which ultimately makes the product teams maybe a little bit less diverse. And yeah, I mean, I could talk about diversity for an hour, so probably let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. So your career went not in a straight line, right? So you said like you made some loops and took some left or right. How do you say sideways? And one, you said like you reflected like really deeply on what you actually want, right? And this is the really, like when you mentioned that last time we spoke, right? So you as a product manager, you have so many skills which you can apply to your life and to your own career, right? That really instantly triggered me and thought, okay, wow, this is like Super interesting. And I think, like this is what we want to talk today about. And we have now a lot of product managers here. And I think, like this is something like when we think about the end of our conversation, what will people listening now, what is the expected outcome for them? What do you think, will be in the conversation now for them to steer on it? Like what will be the outcome for them?
I think if you guys walk away with maybe a different way of approaching your career choices, or maybe feel like you can look at a dilemma in a new perspective, then I would have considered this conversation useful. For instance, often, I mean, maybe not so much these days as there are less job available as there were like 2, 3 years ago, but sometimes you're gonna have like kind of a Sophie's choice situation where you look at one job offer and another job offer and you don't really know how to make that decision, how to make that call. What I want to give is basically a framework to help you make that decision maybe more intentionally.
How do you approach it? I find it marvelous to have like an example like that, right?
Yeah. So, for instance, let's say you are in your job and your job's fine. You like it, but maybe you feel a bit stuck and maybe you're looking for a new opportunity. So how are you going to approach that decision? How are you going to decide where should I move forward? And I think one thing is to look at, I mean, the obvious one is job title. So you're thinking, oh, I'm a PM now, and I want to become senior, which in itself is extremely output centric. So you're basically doing it because you want to become senior. But what does that mean? Why do you want to become senior? And if you look at it as opposed if you're less output centric and more outcome centric, you can start thinking in different terms, like what is it you want to learn? Where is it you want to go? Without having like a 5-year plan, which works for some people. It's never really worked for me. But without having a 5-year plan, like even a short-term roadmap for yourself, thinking maybe you are seeing that everyone wants to work in AI these days. So maybe that's a new skill that you want to develop. And so that would be a super interesting way to discriminate. So basically, you don't necessarily need to think, I'm going to go from PM to senior PM, but maybe you can move in a different industry and so become a data PM or an AI PM if that's something that you want to develop. I'm talking about AI because it feels like everyone around me these days wants to become an AI product manager. And I mean, I get it. But it can also be that you want to think of the skills that you want to develop. So do you want to remain operational? Do you want to become a manager? And how are you going to approach that? It can be, so you can discriminate also in terms of industry. So for instance, I recently discovered that I'm super passionate about healthcare. So I don't necessarily care that my next job will be more senior or more this or more that, but I care that I'll be working in healthcare because I find it from industry perspective and user problem perspective super interesting. And that's something that I want to develop. So that's what I mean by being more intentional, is thinking what gets you going, what are you really interested in and what skills do you want to develop? And maybe think in those terms as opposed to from PM to senior PM. That's one angle. And if that's important to you, that's important to you. But it's not the only angle. That's what I mean.
How do you start, or which are the most crucial tools? Or like if I'm listening to them, I'm like, okay, there's so many options, like if I just think about the most used techniques like user interviews, roadmap, strategy, and I don't know, epics, and like, how do you start? Like, what's the starting point in the process? Is there a process? How did you do that?
So for me, the starting point is being extremely honest with yourself. And so that means if for you the most important thing, for instance, is security, then you're going to want to prioritize some things over others. So I talked about security, and it can be job security. So you will not want to be a freelancer. It can be salary. You're going to want to prioritize the job that gets you the larger salary. So basically thinking, what is the one thing, like what's your North Star, basically?
Yeah.
And if that's security, that's great. Then that way you know, and you don't have to kind of torture yourself thinking, yeah, but that job looks so interesting, etc. No, if you're in a moment of your life where you need a lot of security, that's fine, and it can move later on. So that's where I would start. So to give you maybe a bit of a concrete example, when I mentioned that I took a 6 month break, for me, at that point, the most important thing was flexibility. And so with flexibility comes a number of marvelous things. One of them being more free time to devote to different things. And for me, that was super important. But also comes the fact that you're going to make ultimately less money, maybe if you're not consistently working, and you kind of have to embrace the fact that you're not going to be consistently working if you're a freelancer, and that's okay. And for me, that was fine. And once I realized, oh, actually, I'm deprioritizing security and reprioritizing flexibility, well, that's wonderful, because then the time that I had free for myself, I thought was completely wonderful. And that gave me the opportunity to do a number of things in parallel to my professional life. So as you can see behind me, that way, because this is not mirroring, I picked up the
Yeah.
guitar, which I wanted to do for a very long time. I'm super, super passionate about neurobiology. So I did an introductory course to neurobiology with the University of Chicago. So I did a
Wow.
number of things. And that ended up being a very rich moment in my life that helped me move through a very difficult time in my life. And it ultimately, if you're honest with yourself, it
Mhm.
helps you get in the right direction.
How do you do that? Is that intuition, or is that, just thinking, okay, what do I want? But like if I think, okay, what do I want? Like I might stand up tomorrow morning and think, okay, actually today I want something else. Like how do you, like how do you write that down, or how did you do it?
Some Yeah, some people write that down. I had coffee with a wonderful fellow woman in product the other day who told me that she had a 100 slide PowerPoint that was just all about her, her career, her aspirations, her values, her key strengths, etc. And it's something that she had been working on it over time. And she found it hugely helpful and inspiring to kind of like write that down. For me, I don't really work like this. It's
Hmm.
interesting that you mention intuition, though, because I think it's a great starting point. And to go back to our initial analogy, which is applying product management frameworks into your basically your career and your daily life, I often tell the product managers that I manage that intuition is very much a great place to start. And we shouldn't disregard it, because often we kind of think of intuition as something that's like, ooh, the moon, crystals, and it's not like that at all. And actually, if you allow me to digress for a minute, in my neurobiology class, I learned that you have two types of memory: the explicit memory and the implicit memory. Explicit memory is basically all your conscious memories. If you're recalling what you ate for dinner last night, that's an explicit memory. But your implicit memory is basically all the data that your brain has gathered without you really realizing. It's an unconscious process. So basically, it doesn't happen in the region of your brain that's conscious. And so it doesn't mean that it's not factual. It doesn't mean that it's not database. It just means that it's not a conscious process. And so sometimes, I mean, I'm sure everyone's heard about like being in that flow moment, asking yourself when was I last in that flow? But it can be also a very physical, positive experience. If you're reading about a job description and you're excited, you can feel it. You're like, oh my God, I can't, this is a very exciting job description. Your intuition is telling you that you're into it. And sometimes it goes the other way around, if you're approached and headhunted about a job opportunity and you kind of look at it and you're like, it's okay, then maybe it's not for you. Um, but I know for sure that all the times where you call it a gut feeling, and there's a reason why we call it a gut feeling. It's because it doesn't happen in that part of your brain that is conscious, but it's still a very physical experience. I knew looking back that there were red flags that I chose to ignore. And every time I chose to ignore them, they came back to bite me in the ass. And I'm not saying that just because you have red flags, you should kind of ignore them. I think you should definitely not ignore them. And in fact, ask a lot of questions about that. Like, for instance, one of the companies that I worked for had what do you call that? A motto that was work hard, play hard. I'm more of a work well and live well type of person. So typically, this should have been a red flag, and I should have, investigated and asked more questions, but I didn't. I chose to ignore it. And ultimately, my intuition told me I should have probably asked more questions, and I didn't. And that's what I mean by the starting point is being honest with yourself and looking the clues that you're going to have to look at the right directions that you can have is probably your intuition. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. And I mean, I just told you, like in the 5 minutes before this conversation, that we had last year on the Just Product on the conference a talk, and Julia Bastian, she mentioned that actually gut feeling is really important for product management,
Yeah.
right? And I think Marty Kagan later on the conference called it product sense, right?
Yeah. And you're going to be evaluated on product sense if you apply for Google, for Meta, all those companies. It's actually really fun.
In which situation is it product sense? In which situation is this just, pure guessing? And I mean, there is, like if you can always argue with product sense, right? You can always argue, yeah, I have the gut feeling that it will work, right? But like we do discovery to gather real world data, and there is a value in data, right? It's a counterpart of data, right?
It is. It's not it's not a counterpart. It's part. It is very much database, and I don't think it makes sense to oppose them. It's a wonderful segue into the storytelling point that I wanted to make, is that the thing with gut feeling and the thing with intuition is that the answer kind of comes to you, but you don't know why, and that makes you feel like it's not database, but it is. It's just that there's been so much life experience backing that feeling that you think that it's not database, but it is. So your job is basically to understand why it is you're thinking that way. I'm trying to find a good example. Okay, so when I was working on the redesign of an application, B2C, very large audience. It's basically a classified marketplace. And so I had a very strong gut feeling that the users that end up saving ads and saving searches were power users. And if we were able to kind of make the features that those users use a lot more visible to everyone, we would ultimately be able to increase retention and make the app more efficient, which basically meaning that more users come back, but maybe they don't stay as long. And that was the gut feeling. That was basically where we started. Then looking at it, I basically did the data research, and I realized, the facts back up that intuition. And ultimately, once we built the redesign around this, we ended up hitting the right KPIs, mostly retention. So basically, the way that you're going to have to convince your stakeholder is not saying, guys, I had a gut feeling like this is the way to go. You can start by saying, my intuition was this. And then I looked into it. And then I looked at the behavior. I did the qualitative research as well. We went on the streets and train stations to ask questions to the users. And it ended up being consistent. And so the storytelling that you put around it and how you're going to be able to understand why it is you have that intuition is basically how you're going to be able to sell it. And it's true for product management. It's true for your career. when you're interviewing and you're in front of someone who needs to be convinced is not just saying, this is my gut feeling, or even censoring yourself because you think it's a gut feeling and no one is interested. But it's more be able to unpack all of that and kind of sell the idea.
Super interesting, because what you're basically saying is that your feelings give you an indication, and you just described how you actually then looked into data whether you can actually support your feelings, right? And
yeah, the importance of feelings, they're magical. But on top of that, I do think it's a fantastic tool to make decisions. And ultimately, yeah, I think it's a great compass to make those decisions.
Yeah, I once heard a podcast, I don't know from who it was, and they discussed actually that feelings give you indication about what's important for you in your life. So if you're sad, it's just a sign that the thing which happened, was important for you, or like, I don't know, you lose somebody, or you, I don't know, separate in your relationship or something like that. Like if you said, it's just a sign that you actually value the thing, right? And
that's of course, actually,
yeah. Same thing, right? If you, yeah.
And it's exactly what I was saying about the same thing as the red flag conversation. I'm not saying you should not go for opportunities that have red flags, because ultimately a lot of opportunities have some of them. It just means that you should look at it closer. And it's the same with your feelings. If you're feeling very uncomfortable about something, if you're feeling sad about something, don't bottle it up and expect it to go away. It won't. But one of the things also that I kind of want to make clear is that we rarely make decisions kind of in a whimsical way. We always think in patterns, and the brain is a pattern recognition machine. So basically what I'm saying is, like the other day I was discussing with a designer, and I was asking him what was his methodology to create designs. It's a company that I'm helping to kind of reorganize the product and tech team. And he said, oh, I have kind of no methodology. And I don't believe that. I don't think anyone has no methodology. You always apply a logic. It doesn't matter. And I'm not here to judge whether your logic is right or wrong. Yeah. I'm more interested in what type of logic do you apply, why, and kind of do it intentionally. And it's the same with your career. You are applying a logic, whether it feels probably very organic, but sometimes it means that you're very people driven. Like the people that you meet are important to you, and the relationships that you're going to build are important to you. And that's how you're going to go from one job to the other. It's not going to be that organic ultimately. It means that the logic you've applied is trust the people that you're going to work with. And that's a great way to make decisions, honestly. But just be conscious that's how you're doing it.
Diane, one comment. Sometimes your picture freezes a little bit. Maybe you can, just close other applications on your laptop or something like that. But
sure.
Like the voice is always perfect, so no worries. Don't stress too much about it. So we can hear you.
Just quit perfect. Slack. Let me quit Spotify.
Yeah,
should be fine.
Yeah. Okay. So. Love it. So you said, okay, first you think, okay, what's really important for me in my personal life? Be honest with you. That's more or less like the North Star. This is your guiding principles. You said something, okay, you've been keen on security. Then you've been more, okay, I want flexibility. And I really can emphasize with that because, like when I was like freelancing, or you have a job, then you're full on, right? And if you don't have a job, you're always searching for something. But if you really value flexibility, then that gives you the freedom and space in your mind, right? To say, okay, I study neuroscience or something like that. Really love it. And then you said, like, so we have the North Star. Then you said, okay, listen to your intuition, to your feelings, and then support it with data. Yeah, which direction you go, that gives you a sense of, okay, where to go.
Yeah. And so, for instance, when I was talking about, you were asking me, what do you want people who are listening to to take away. I was telling you about, looking at realizing that you have a myriad of ways of making a decision. And it's not just, we took the example of job title. So you can look at industry, skills, what you want to learn. Like, do you want to go in B2B, B2C, try something new? And all of that is fine. And my point is, maybe your intuition is a great way to start. So that, because otherwise it feels very overwhelming. You're like, oh my God, all these jobs and all these opportunities. You have to discriminate and you have to prioritize. And for all the product managers out there, I'm sure you probably have that déformation professionnelle where you're thinking, we need to prioritize. We can't do everything. What do I want my holiday to look like? We need to prioritize. And that you have to do the same thing with your career choices. And you kind of have to start somewhere.
What other tools from product management did you apply to your career choices? Is it, I don't know, interviews, whatsoever?
So there are a number of things. We talked a lot about storytelling, and I really cannot emphasize this enough. You can sell anything if you own it and if you give it the right storytelling. All your failures, all the the jobs that you had that you think don't make sense, ultimately they do make sense. I think it was I guess this is a moment of the conversation where we talk about Steve Jobs, but I think it's a great example where he was talking about how he took calligraphy classes, and he didn't know why. He just thought it was interesting. And then once Apple created Microsoft Word, this is why we have fonts, and I guess this is why we have Comic Sans MS, which is getting a lot of love from Gen Zs apparently. So these things, they kind of make sense looking backwards, and own it and kind of like really sell it, because people will love it ultimately, and that's how you'll be convincing. So for your interviews, yeah, the importance of storytelling. I think as product managers, you mentioned it from the get-go, how basically you have to be really good at communication. And I kind of want to push that a notch further and talk about networking. So networking is, I would say, it's kind of the ability to foster meaningful connections that might or might not end up being useful to your career. And it's the same. I mean, you have your stakeholders. You have to kind of create a bridge with those people, whether you agree or not, whether you get along or not. And so for your direct stakeholders, but also for your indirect stakeholders. And I think that's especially true if you work in a corporate job or in a very large corporation, because your capacity to meet people and understand what they do kind of will help you further down the line. And I think it's super important to do it as you grow more senior. We were discussing it with Shannon, how basically all the jobs that we've had in the last few years didn't come through applications. And by the way, I just want to put it out there for those who are listening. If you've applied to a job online and were unsuccessful, please, by all means, do not take it personally. It does not mean your application is not relevant or your profile is not good. It just means that those systems are really, really terrible and sometimes filter great people. So the best way for you to get visibility is through the hiring manager. And the best way to get through the hiring manager is knowing someone who knows the hiring manager, or knowing the hiring manager straight away. And so I like to compare networking. It's like a garden, basically. You don't take the fruits from your garden if you haven't tended it for years. And it's the same. And the earlier you start, the better it will be further down the line.
I love this picture. This is a great picture. I also love the phrase foster meaningful connections. What does that mean for you?
For me, very personally, networking comes, I suppose, more naturally than for others, mostly because I love meeting new people. And I'm very authentic, so I'm not going to be, basically, if I don't get along with someone, I'm not going to force it. It's okay. We can't get along with everyone. And I would really encourage you to be as authentic as possible, because When you're having a good time, it shows. And if you're having a good time, most likely the person in front of you is having a good time as well. And then it can be utilitarian. Maybe you have like a question that you want to ask or a favor that you want to ask, and that's okay. I've, helped out a lot of people and I didn't expect anything in return, but more often than not, it came back. And I think that's it's a very karmic way of looking at things. I think it changes a lot from countries to countries. That's what we were discussing when we're waiting for this to go live.
Yeah.
I would say maybe the US is a little bit more transactional than we are in France. In France, you kind of have to disguise it a little bit more, fluff, put some fluff around it.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Asking for favors is okay. Just don't ask for favors from someone that you've met once and barely know. So have coffees, e-coffees, lunches, it's fine.
So we had the US. Now the big question is, of course, how are the Germans?
I'm not sure. You tell us, actually. What do you think Germans are like in networking?
Not sure. I can emphasize with the US, right? So you're 10 minutes into the meeting and then, okay, why are we here? What are we doing here? Right?
Yeah.
I think French are more indirect than the Germans.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we are a little bit more direct, but I totally can emphasize with like when I started, when I was young, starting to work, I didn't understand what's networking. I thought, okay, I do to LinkedIn or Xing, right? That was networking for me. I didn't understand like the fruits, like what you described with the fruits, right? It takes some years for something to come back and you recognize, oh wow, yeah, I have people around me who support me, right? When I need something, I know to go to somebody, right?
Yeah.
It's based on trust, on a built up relationship. Yeah, meaningful connections. Yeah, means we work together. We did something together, and can be small or big, right?
Yeah. And I think if we go back to my product management career analogy, this is very much like user research. So when I talk about the importance of user research, I explain that there's what you know, there's what you know you don't know, and typically, so what you sorry, this is very distracting, the common thing. So there's so what you know, what you don't know, and typically this is what you're going to check with your users to make sure that you think this is a problem, but maybe let's ask our users and make sure it's a problem before we invest. And there's what you don't know. And if you apply that to networking, there's what you know. And now, for instance, I'm going to go to a product manager and say, oh, I've been having this problem with the tech lead. What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of what you can expect of getting out of the conversation. What you don't know. And then maybe you're going to ask for advice. But what you don't know is why you should network, because you don't know what's out there. And when it comes to job opportunities, you don't know. But maybe in your friend's company or this company, things are moving and something's going to open up, and you want to know, because then you want to be able to reach out to the hiring manager and say, by the way, I heard this was moving. If you want to have a coffee and see how I could be helpful, let's do that. And that's why you should do it, even if you don't necessarily have a purpose, just to catch up.
Yeah, and I mean, you do network anyway, if you know it or not, right?
Yeah.
Because, it's just do you do it intentionally, or with keep the circle and keep people updated and stuff like that. But I also like the you don't know what you don't know, right? So you don't know like the future, will happen, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting because so we were talking about freelancing, and I had all these assumptions going in, mostly that it would give me a lot of flexibility, and it turned out to be true. But I had a lot of assumptions, and we were discussing that, like going back to that maybe tenuous analogy with product management tools, doing retros, and so doing a retro with yourself. The other day, I was thinking about, so I've been a freelancer for 2 years, and I realized I went in thinking it would Impact my career negatively in the sense that I thought I'd be doing a lot of operational work, which
Mm.
I love anyway. So that was fine by me.
Yeah.
But then I thought, going back to the progression, like, oh, maybe I wouldn't be considered for head of product roles and these types of roles. And
Mm.
interestingly, since becoming a freelancer, I've been doing a lot more managerial work than I was before. And the assumption that you're only going to be used for like short-term missions that are very operational, maybe related to launching a new product, maybe related to like running a discovery for a client, it's not necessarily true. And so I didn't know that, but I had kind of to walk the path and realize and take a moment to think about, oh,
Yeah.
wow, actually, that is a success.
Yeah.
And I should recognize it.
Yeah. And you found that out in a reflection which you did with yourself.
Yeah, just reflecting on the last 2 years and thinking about everything that I mean, becoming a freelancer. In many ways, I felt like I didn't have a choice because I did need a lot of flexibility. But in other ways, I felt like, oh my God, then maybe I'm going to lose time comparing myself with others. LinkedIn is a wonderful place to do that. So I thought, oh no, this is terrible. Well, no, let's not go there. But I did it anyway. And then I realized actually a lot of the assumptions that I had were absolutely not true. And becoming basically, you get out of it what you bring to it. And if you bring energy, curiosity, and can-do attitude, a lot of things can happen. And so I think it's super interesting also for me, and maybe that will resonate with people who are listening, and maybe especially women. A lot of women, when they look at a job, they wonder whether they can do 100% of the requirements of the job desk. And if they can't, it makes them super nervous. And becoming a freelancer kind of completely de-risked that for me, because I thought, well, I'm going in for what, 6 months, 9 months, it's fine. So I'm sure I'll be able to manage for 9 months. And then going in, I realized actually I can probably manage for more than 9 months. And I kind of de-risk those jobs for me, which I previously would have been maybe a little bit anxious to apply for at first.
Interesting. I heard that before from somebody who's running a female network here in Germany, and she said like men are totally the opposite way, right? 50%, like I have that, right, and then okay, I can apply, right? If there is one bullet point, I know that, right? Men apply, and women are more like, okay, it's a list I need to check all, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Same observation. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for that, freelancing was great, and it made me a lot more confident in the fact that there's a myriad of jobs I can do full time if I want to go back to full time.
Interesting. Well, what a learning.
For me, mostly it was kind of am I able to manage a team of like 5, 6 product managers? Am I able to have to be helpful and to be impactful? And turns out I can. So it's great. I can be helpful. It's wonderful. But going in, I think I would have been, I was impressed with the fact that it was a lot of PMs and some of them had a lot of experience. And it's super challenging. I mean, it's challenging to manage someone who's extremely junior, but it's also challenging to manage someone who's extremely senior. Because for one, you're like, oh my God, why do you not understand what I'm saying? Because the skills gap is so huge that what you think is super intuitive is not so natural for someone who's a true beginner. And for someone who's super senior, for me, it was challenging in the sense that I was wondering, am I helpful to you? Am I actually doing my job? Am I hindering you in any way? And ultimately, I ended up having really positive feedback from that individual. So that was a great learning. So go for it.
Interesting. Is there another tool you used for your career decisions in your personal life, which you usually use in product management?
So We talked about when we were discussing preparing this conversation, we talked a lot about outcome and outputs, and I think thinking in terms of like what you want to achieve, as opposed to maybe something that's more output centric, like a job title, for instance. We briefly touched upon road mapping for yourself. We can talk about it a little bit further, but my belief, and that's very personal, much like in product management, having a super long-term roadmap does not make sense because a lot of things can change. And for me, I found the same. But being intentional about what you want to do and what you want to achieve, I think is super helpful. So, for instance, maybe I like to encourage people to be pragmatic and not overly ambitious. Set yourself reasonable goals that you can achieve within a given time frame. So, for instance, for me, last year's objective was to get that neurobiology degree, and I did, and it was great. I was so proud once I got it, and the learning that I got is very much for me. Maybe one day, much like the calligraphy classes, will come back into my professional life. But it gives you so much purpose and so much joy to be able to do the things for yourself that you want to do. But if you don't decide on it, if you're not intentional about it, it's never going to happen. So maybe decide on like one skill or one thing that you want to achieve, and it can be an online course, it can be a new job, it can be a new skill, it can be deciding that you want to be better at networking, and so you're like one lunch per month or something like that, and at least you're intentional about it and you make sure it happens. So I would say that's a very helpful one. And we kind of have a tendency to live and let live, and we don't necessarily take the time to make that happen.
Interesting.
But so on top of that, I think we can also talk about OKRs, but OKRs ultimately are it's a great tool, and it takes probably a bit of time for you to decide what's the most important thing. But ultimately, I would say the OKR framework is kind of is a great summary of everything that we've discussed. Like, what are your outcomes and how you're going to measure success and how you're going to know. Like, for instance, I want more work-life balance. Great. But what does that mean? And what are you going to use it for? Because otherwise, you might end up in that terrible space where you have free time and you're like guilt tripping yourself. Oh, I'm not making enough of that time. I'm not sufficiently utilitarian about it. And so making sure that if you have the time free to do what you want to do, what is it that you want to do with that time? And if it's nothing, that's fine, but at least decide that it's just time to sit on my couch and read books.
Super interesting. I can sense, that you're in a position in your life where you really are 100% control of your career, and your career serves your life, and that's wonderful to see. Congratulations to that.
Thanks.
Awesome.
I think it's helpful to have examples around you of people who were able to do that, and so that you know that it's possible. I have a wonderful friend who comes from Chamonix, and her father at some point decided that he wanted his life he wanted to be outdoorsy, he wanted to live in Chamonix, and he decided the rest was going to work. And I thought it was hugely inspiring. And just basically making that decision for yourself and slowly but surely building it brick by brick and taking the time to reflect on it afterwards, to celebrate your success the same way when you do a retro with your team and you have like a huge milestone that's achieved, you want to celebrate the success for your team, and so you should do that with yourself.
What did change in your life when you discovered that and applied these methods to your situation, to your life, to your career?
I think a huge element of that is letting go of fear. So fear that you're not going to find a new job, fear that things are not going to work out. It's kind of a leap of faith, and you have to trust that you can get it done. So now I'm very much talking about freelancing. The advice that I usually give is, if there are some prerequisite for freelancing to work, one is you have to be sufficiently senior. because you are a cost center for your clients. So you have to bring value fairly quickly. And if you're too junior, it's going to be very hard and hugely stressful. So I do not recommend it. You have to have sufficient visibility. And unfortunately, LinkedIn is a great tool for that. And I know a lot of people hate being visible on LinkedIn, and I 100% get it. But when you look at all the content out there, just realize a lot of it is not so good. So you probably have a lot of things to say and you don't even realize it. And another one, finally, is having the right network to support you. And we've talked about it, I think, sufficiently, but it's super important for you to be able to find all these new jobs. And I didn't realize that these were the requirements when I went in, but like a year into it, I thought, maybe that's why it worked out. So I think going in, there was a lot of fear, and then there was a lot of, we haven't really talked about stakeholders and expectations, etc. But for me, I kind of went in talking about that the fact that my career was like the escalator of success, as you call it. So, junior, senior, lead, head of, etc. And that's a lot of my job satisfaction came from that, which is extremely superficial in the end. It doesn't bring you a lot of joy. And so kind of, letting go of that fear and letting go of that framework was hugely liberating. And as I said, it turns out I am doing jobs that qualify as head of product, etc. I just didn't know that I would be.
So I want to open up the conversation a little bit for questions. There are not many questions so far in the chat. So please, if you have a question, write it down. And we, I found it super inspiring and interesting, the conversation. So I, maybe somebody has a question. We have a time lag of about a minute, 1.5 or something. So it might take now a little bit.
Yeah.
We take the time to show the audience our upcoming conversations on LinkedIn in the next couple of weeks. Next week, we speak with Melissa, and she's writing a book. It's called Aligned, how you align with stakeholders and product leaders. I think this is like one of the biggest topics for product managers all the time. How can you do that? It's really challenging. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation. And we have another one in June where Sebastian has the possibility to talk to Joachim. He worked at Gympass, and they did a transformation which was really successful, which is also one example of the book of Marty Kagan in the latest book, Transform. And that will be a super exciting conversation as well. So if you liked today, here, Kitty.
Of course, always.
If you liked today, feel free to sign up for these conversations as well. Yeah. So we have
super curious about next week's topic, the align one.
Yeah, alignment. I mean, this is really this is one of the big topics in the Product Masterclass every time. Align with stakeholder. How do I, often, if you just, start off your career, how do I, have eyesight? How do I manage that? How do I, get heard? And it's so many aspects of. Okay, we have a couple of questions. We can't see the name here, but I can go in parallel. That's Marta asks, how did you find the first clients as a freelancer? Networking?
Hi, Marta. So that's a great question. How did I find my first job? So the very first one, I had recently organized a webinar on freelancing, and one of my speakers was a freelancer, and so she was working for scale up called Aircall, and they needed someone to do product management training in English, and she felt like it was a 2-people job. And so she reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to do this? Because it's a lot, and I can't do it on my own." And actually, it was super helpful. One, because I wasn't alone, and I like working pairing. And second, because it kind of found me. And then from that point onwards, I felt like I was sufficiently legitimate because I already had a track record to kind of go on and just basically say, create the structure on freelancing, et cetera, et cetera. So basically through my network.
Yeah. Another question, Elmer, he asks, did you ever have contact with hardware product development?
Yes, I have. I have when I was working as a consultant for a product for automobile manufacturer. And that was actually very interesting one, because you don't build software the same way you build hardware. And for companies that have first built hardware, they have a really hard time building software. So basically, you know, if the main difference being, if I have, I don't know, like 100 notebooks, once I sell my 100 notebooks, I will have no notebooks left. Whereas if you sell software, you have 100 pieces of software, you'll still have an infinite supply. And it kind of completely changes the paradigm. And they have a really hard time shifting to that paradigm. I'm curious why you asked that question, though, and if you had like a subsequent question.
Yeah, exactly. I know he's working also in the automobile industry, so
yeah,
I guess because of the differences. But maybe you can just shoot another answer in the chat here or in the comments, Emma, and then we will discuss it further here. Yeah. What else do we have here? A suggestion for a great book. Of course, it's Marty Kagan, right? Empowered.
Yeah.
What do you mean about? What do you think about it? Did you read it? Do you think?
Oh, Marty Kagan, one true king of product management. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
There's one book that I really recommend if you're planning to interview and switching jobs. It's called Cracking the PM Interview. It's not rocket science at all, but it's a very good summary of everything you need to have in mind prior to applying for a product manager role. You'll come out a lot more prepared, a lot more concise, and very clear storytelling. So 100% recommend it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. What was the name? Cracking
the PM Interview.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Here's another question. What differentiates between PO and product manager in terms of tasks, daily responsibilities?
That's a good one. I would say that largely varies according to the organizations. So I can give you a general answer, but don't expect it to be true for all companies. Product owners typically own the delivery aspect of product management. Product managers own the delivery aspect and the more strategic aspects of product management. So basically deciding what are the outcomes that we want to get moving, how are we going to get there, which problems do we want to address first. Now, that being said, I've also seen companies where product managers own kind of like the first part of the double diamond. So the strategic aspect and going from many problems to one problem, and POs owning the delivery part.
Yeah, PMs, yeah.
The PM interview.
Sorry, PM interview, cracking the PM interview. Exactly. It's a red book, I think. I can post the link later. I just in parallel looked it up on Amazon as well.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All good?
Yeah, I think it was awesome. Like, you have a great energy. I can see, networking with the woman network. I can really feel like you mastered your career and designed it for your life. And I think that's super inspiring, and see, that you actually can do that, mold your career around what you actually want in your life. Yeah. Super nice.
Thank you so much. That goes straight to the heart. I thank you for the opportunity and really enjoyed our conversation. I hope for the people who are listening or will be listening that they will find some little nuggets to help them unblock themselves in their career choices. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.
Yes, that was my next question. Where do they find them? Find you? LinkedIn? Do you have a website? Yeah. Whatever. For which questions and which tasks can they approach you? What is the sweet spot of what you actually usually do in product?
So as a freelancer, as I mentioned, I've been working mostly in managerial positions, but I'm also a very keen user researcher. So I'm very happy if you have any questions regarding that. If you have coaching needs or just career conversations that you want to have, very happy to answer those questions. Feel free to reach out.
So connect with her on LinkedIn. That's what's called networking. Yeah, write her a short note. What do you found inspiring in this conversation? Diane, thank you so much. It was super nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me make one last announcement from our side. We have a conference each year. Yeah, will come up in October. This is the website, justproduct.de. We have amazing speakers already, Ryan Singer, David Pereira. There are a lot of other speakers lined up. It's super affordable. It's at the moment 300 euros. These are some speakers we had in the past: Ash Murray, Marty Kagan, Justina Diepel, Pavel, Bob Master. Yeah, great people. We have a great location. So if you're interested in that, check it out under Just.
Congrats. It looks great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We need more women speakers, though.
We work on that, right? We work on that. We try. We really try to have half and half. We managed it the last couple of years, but it is actually really a challenge. It's not so easy. Actually, you need to do that intentionally. Otherwise, you end up with a lot more men.
Yes. You do need to do that intentionally, 100%, but it's great that you've done it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And
thank you. Take care.
Have a great evening.
Ciao, ciao.